snowshoes, camping and fishing gear for wilderness treks. Back in the comfort of the Canadian, we continue on our journey through Ontario's wet and wild scenery to Winnipeg. The Canadian pulls into Winnipeg in the early afternoon. The capital of Manitoba has been called an old city in a new country and still retains its turn-of-the-century architecture.
All transportation, trade, and immigration passed through Winnipeg, so it saw for itself a future as the Chicago of the North. One of the jewels, architecturally speaking, is what's known as the Exchange District. This would have been essentially the first downtown of Winnipeg, sort of 1880s to 1914. There's very impressive brick buildings and so on. There's a street that was known as Newspaper Row, or as the old Telegram Building. In the 1880s, land at the corner of Portage and Main were fetching the same prices that a square foot of land were costing in New York City. St. Boniface itself has a number of very interesting structures as well. The St. Boniface Museum, for instance, is the only remnant, other than the Fort Garry Gate, of the Red River period. It's the largest oak log building in North America. It's been a National Historic Site since 1958. But of course, the real jewel in the crown in St. Boniface is the cathedral and the basilica ruins. The basilica, of course, was an outstanding architectural treasure. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by fire in 1968. But the success that the architect achieved in melding the old exterior with the modern cathedral, I think, is just marvelous.
Manitoba is full of surprises. There are rolling prairies, dense forests, wet marshlands, and colorful valleys.
Okanagan Marsh was one of the first drainage districts in Western Canada. Then in the early 70s, Ducks Unlimited and the Department of Natural Resources got together and decided to restore a portion of the former marsh that had existed here. And they also built a number of nesting islands to provide some safe areas for birds to nest. Wetlands are second only to rainforests in the amount of biological diversity that they contain.
At Gimli, Íslandsdagadagurinn is a celebration of Icelandic heritage. The Icelanders came here about 125 years ago after a devastating volcanic eruption in their homeland. They settled in Gimli and Hekla on Lake Winnipeg.
The first Icelanders came here to settle as colonists in 1875.
When they arrived in open barges in late October, it was already snowing and a winter storm was brewing. The steamship Coldwell had managed to tow them here to Willow Point on Lake Winnipeg. As the blizzard worsened, the captain warned them to turn back or they would all perish.
And they were totally in disagreement with him. They argued with him for some 2 hours, and then finally he chopped the rope and let them go. They came to an absolute total wilderness. There was nothing but trees and swamp.
It was a rude welcome, but they survived. And the annual Islandigadagaran celebrates the strength and character of those early pioneers. There are no roads leading to the next stop of our journey. The only way to get there is by plane or by train. Churchill, Manitoba is Canada's only Arctic seaport. It's also the polar bear capital of the world. The essence of both the wildlife and Inuit lifestyle is captured in soapstone by carvers like Camilla Ikelik. In the fall, travelers in search of polar bears and caribou get around in tundra buggies. They stick to bumpy old trails to avoid further damage to the fragile environment. In the tundra, there's only a few centimeters of soil above the bedrock, yet it supports more than 200 different species of plants. West of Winnipeg at Spruce Woods Provincial Park, prehistoric spear tips have been dated back to the Clovis people, hunters of the now extinct giant bison and mammoth.
It was first used by native people hundreds of years ago. And then after that, with the dawn of the fur trade, it became a popular place for fur traders to use at the junction of the Epinette and the Assiniboine River. We have a healthy population of beaver, which is part of the reason for the fur trade. The Spirit Sands, they were first formed about 18,000 years ago when the river draining into glacial Lake Agassiz left the deposits of sand. And then as the lake receded, the sands was still well above the surrounding water, and it first began getting colonized by plants such as spruce and tamarack and then grasses. But it's the sands themselves that make it unique.
Brandon is Manitoba's second largest city. It began as a CPR post in 1881, but is known throughout the Commonwealth for its role during the Second World War. This is where British, Australian, and New Zealand pilots learned to fly, one of Canada's great contributions to the Allied victory. The museum in a wartime hangar remembers the war years.
There's 14 aircraft on display, as well as uniforms, all other kinds of memorabilia, photographs, etc.
North Brandon Station has such a short platform that the train sometimes has to pull ahead so everyone can get on and off.
This is your second call for dinner in the dining car.
Once back on board the Canadian, dinner is served. It is early morning when the Canadian arrives at Saskatoon. Saskatoon may be in the middle of the prairies, but it's known as the City of Bridges.
Small towns in Saskatchewan are having a difficult time. We're fortunate we have a resource. It's the nationally significant history that's here. We borrowed the idea from Chemainus on Vancouver Island.
The dream of a Métis state on the prairies ended here in Saskatchewan in 1885 at the Battle of Batoche. The year before, Louis Riel had petitioned Ottawa for Métis land rights and better conditions for starving Indian bands. When Ottawa turned him down, Riel set up a provisional government. Ottawa dispatched the military to put down the uprising. After a 4-day siege, Batoche was captured. Riel was hanged for treason. Indian leaders Big Bear and Poundmaker were jailed and died shortly after getting out of prison. Depending on which side you were on, the West had been won and lost. What archaeologists found at Wanuskewin, just outside Saskatoon, bolstered the belief that ancient Aboriginal societies had developed around a phenomenon called buffalo jumps.
The archaeologists that first arrived here in the 3032 were looking at the very readily visible sites, such as the Medicine Wheel site, the teepee rings. It wasn't until later they started to investigate the valley and such that things were eroding out of the creek banks, such as bones and pottery. People have been using this valley for just about 6,000 years and using it as a hunting area, place to procure bison, berries, and things like that. Plains Cree tradition was an oral tradition, so all these things were passed down through storytelling from elders and on to younger people. I think it's hard for people to imagine that it hasn't been written down, these things, you know, even though 6,000 years old. We're not going to find any clay tablets or anything like that out here.
Boreal forest is one of the largest terrestrial ecosystems on the entire face of the planet, and most of the northern hemisphere is covered with boreal forests. It covers more than a third of what Canada's landmass. It's an area typified by long, cold winters and a very short growing season. And the forests that are a result of that are predominantly coniferous forests. Prince Albert National Park is on the southern edge of the Great Northern Forest. And because of that, we see quite a blending of the animal habitats and the different kinds of vegetation, and very rich species diversity in this area.
We have species that you'll find in the southern habitats, typical of southern Saskatchewan, of course, and those species in the north. For instance, in the south, we'll find elk and white-tailed deer, and in the corner of the park, we'll find plains bison.
Prince Albert National Park has a population of somewhere between, 60 and 100 wolves, a healthy population and definitely a viable population of wolves.
I think we've got like 200 species of birds, everything from a couple of species of hummingbirds, so ones rarely seen, right up to loons and all sorts of species of woodpeckers and owls, a great diversity that way. The more we build and change the national park, the less there is of what people come here for the recreation and for the rejuvenation.
People like to make an awful lot about the importance of the rainforest, and certainly it is one of the organs of the earth, but the boreal forest is also one of the vital organs of the earth because of its immense size.
It was here in Prince Albert National Park that Grey Owl, the famous and eccentric conservationist, lived, sharing a cabin with 2 pet beaver. His notoriety came from deception. He had fooled everyone.
The greater public certainly was of that mind, that he was a half-breed Indian, and that he was coming from the wilds of Canada to tell this story. He was really an Englishman. His name was Archibald Bellany from Hastings, England. When he emigrated to Canada as a young man, he embarked on a complete transition of his lifestyle from a young, well-to-do Englishman into a half-breed bushman. In short, he became a conservationist rather than a hunter and a trapper. And he became very famous for his books and his films and his lecture tours, inspiring people about the beauty of the Canadian wilderness and the need to protect that.
Grey Owl died in 1938 and was buried on the shores of Agawa Lake in Prince Albert National Park, where his cabin still stands.
This park was established in 1927 in a transition zone between the prairies and aspen parkland and the boreal forest of what is really central Saskatchewan. You know, fungi just never get enough credit for their role in the ecosystem, and I'm glad that we're spending a few extra moments to take a look at them. So important in the cycle of decomposition and release of nutrients and things. Some of them can come up through the ground virtually overnight. You know, it doesn't take 24, 48 hours maybe for them to pop. And what we're looking at is just the fruiting body, just the reproductive structures. What's really amazing, and we'll never get a footage of it, are all the fungal fingers that spread out underneath the forest floor and link this forest with the rest of the organisms. We've got smaller woodpeckers like blackback woodpeckers and three-toed woodpeckers that will search the bark and flick off pieces of it with their bills, and then they'll feed on the insects underneath. It's a mature trembling aspen, probably around 70 or 80 years, something like that, for this growing site. And obviously they felled it, and it just happened to end up in the creek bed. And as you can see, they've cut off the upper branches. They've topped the tree after it's been down. They'll use those upper branches for the dam and the lodge, and the smaller branches and leaves, of course, they'll use as feed, either incorporating them into the dam or lodge, or probably into a food raft for the wintertime.
Back aboard the Canadian, we head west out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, bound for Alberta and points west in British Columbia.